All right, y'all. What's going on? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. And y'all know what it is. Trying to get it back in. See people coming through early, which I'm happy to see. Especially, I think they're here to see the guests that I have. So I'm looking forward to the discussion we're about to have. Shout out to Brotherly Love, Ray Hama, Busy Mike. What's up? Prince Johnny. We got Aaron in here. AKs and Curtains, what's going on? Indigo, Marcus, Barry, what's up? Hope everybody's well. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate if you will. Support the channel so you can continue to get independent black male thought on all kinds of issues. And as y'all know, we're going to get straight into it. We've been talking about the Black Panther this last week and a half or so, especially since the new trailer dropped. And we've had a lot to say about that. I've actually done a couple of shows with Judge Joe Brown talking about this very issue. We started out talking about the Woman King and then Black Panther, and you can see how easily those two things folded into each other. But we're going to do the same tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about this with someone who is an expert. Now, I myself have been a 40-year comic book reader and collector. And I had, at one point in time, I was interested in going into comics, but I never did. My guest, on the other hand, delved straight in and has been doing it for quite a while. We're going to find out just how long. So let me go ahead and welcome Mr. Shawn James. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good. I wanted to start out by finding out a little bit more about you and your relationship to comics. How long have you been into comics? How did you get into it? And tell us a little bit about that journey for you. In coming into comics and whatnot.
Well, I've been into comics ever since I was about 4 years old, and I got into comics because my brother had a huge comic collection, and I always wanted to read his comic collection. In fact, it was his comic collection that was the way I learned how to read, and I
Yes.
started out learning how to read with the late George Perez's run on Avengers back in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So comic books have been a part of my life ever since I was 4 years old. I would read my brother's comic collection, and then later on, I started buying my own books.
Yeah.
And for years, I aspired to be a comic book writer, but I just couldn't break into the business. But I always wanted to be a part of comics. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I became a writer,
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't draw a comic. So I started making stories with words, and then I went into starting to go out here and writing my own stories ever since I was 9 years old.
Yeah.
And from there, I started going in and started working on trying to work on my first book. And I published my first book with a POD company, ISIS, in 2002. And
Nice.
then later on, I started my own publishing business, SJS Direct, in 2009. And
Mm.
after starting SJS Direct, I focused on a mission of creating positive stories about the Black experience. And I wanted to diversify the Black book market to show that there were different genres that Black characters could be a part of, like fantasy, science fiction. And I did that on the SJS Direct imprint with books like The Temptation of John Haynes, which I published in 2011,
Mm.
and the ISIS series of books I started in 2012, the Esteem series, which I started, I think, about 2012 as well. And then I started doing other types of fantasy books, like 2020, I did a vampire novel, Eternal Night. And over the course of the last decade, I've done over 80 books. And this year, I started
Nice.
a project that takes me back to why I wanted to do comic, which was a comic book, which is John Haynes at Death's Door. Now, the John Haynes at Death's Door, this was a comic project that I did to celebrate the 5th year of the John Haynes series being in print. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to show readers what a story from one of my series, the John Haynes series, would look like as a comic. And currently, the project is fully funded, and we're working towards the second stretch goal and the Kickstarter for John Haynes at Death's Door right now. We have 4 days to go, and I want everybody to be able to pick up a copy of John Haynes at Death's Door, which is
Right.
on Kickstarter right now.
Okay. and I want us to get more in depth on John Haynes and a number of your projects. I didn't realize you said 80 books.
Yeah, 80 different
That's
books in
impressive.
fiction, nonfiction, and there's a whole, most of them are, a lot of them are fantasy titles.
Impressive, impressive. But real quick, there's a couple things I want to touch on that you dropped. I've been saying this for a minute about the importance of comic books and especially Black boys, the way in which comics helps to facilitate a love for reading. You mentioned that was early on one of the things that you got drawn into in terms of reading. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of comics to your relationship to reading and writing?
Well, comics were the way I learned how to read. I mean, kid boys are drawn to comics because boys are naturally visual, and we like seeing those pictures of those superheroes because they're bright and they're filled with energy, and that's what draws us in to want to read. And that when I remember I was 4 years old, that's what drew me in. I remember my favorite characters were the Avengers and especially Iron Man,
Mm,
and that's what drew me in were those pictures of those characters.
right.
And as I started looking at the action, I started reading the words, and that's how I learned how to read. So for young Black boys, it's very important. Comic books are a major thing because some boys don't like to read all of those dense paragraphs that girls like to read, but
Mm,
comics will draw a boy in and get
yes.
his attention and get him interested in reading, and it can start a lifelong love of reading. And for me, it started my way from going into comics, and then I started reading other types of books like Richard Scarry, and this is what made me want to go out here and write my own stories because I saw how much fun those characters were. And I
Yeah.
wanted to have that fun making those stories myself.
Oh man, I had the same experience, and I probably started around the same age. I think the book that got me though was probably Muhammad Ali versus Superman.
That's a
That was,
classic.
and it was, and you remember it was supersized, right?
Yeah.
So as a little kid, I'm looking at this supersized comic, and I'm seeing my hero Muhammad Ali knocking the crap out of Superman. And I'm just like, I think that probably sealed the deal for me. It's a 72 page book. If you haven't seen it, look it up. But that's probably what got me. And you're right. The colors, but also the whole kind of hero's journey
Yeah.
that kind of pulled me in as well. And I didn't understand this relationship I had with comics, but I was tied to it. So here I am walking around reading this stuff, taking it in, and not realizing that I'm probably one of the more advanced readers in my elementary school classes because of comic books. I'm walking around here talking about a sanctum sanctorum,
Hmm.
and none of my other classmates knew what the hell that was, but that was the kind of stuff I was taking in. I was so deeply drawn in. I remember I had a geography test at one point in elementary school, and they asked for the largest cities in America. And out of the cities I listed, Gotham City and Metropolis were in that list because
Hmm.
nobody told me they were fictitious. So, but that being said, one of the things I've noticed in your analyses as well as in the projects that you've created yourself, you seem to have a tie to Black manhood, Black men. Talk a little bit about what that is. Why does Shawn James publish on Black men and Black male heroes?
Well, the reason why I publish on Black men and Black manhood is because I want to present a positive image of Black manhood and Black masculinity, especially to all the young boys out there. I want there to be an image for them to see of a Black man and how he carries and conducts himself in the world and how he goes out here and, and represents in a positive fashion. So I wanted to show with the John Haynes character that there was a Black man out here who was representing a positive image of Black manhood and Black masculinity and showing them an example of what they could be like. Because one of the reasons why I made John Haynes a CEO of a major corporation is because a Black CEO is something we really don't get to see all the time. And we really don't get to see a Black man wielding and using that kind of power. And that was something I really wanted to show young boys that they could be. And I also wanted to show them that a Black man could go out here and be that kind of leader, that could go out here and run a multinational corporation, and also could be an example to them of how they could go out here and lead in their communities. And they can also go out here and lead and be an example to everybody out here so that they can be a man that everybody can, that is a role model to everyone.
Right. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation with you is, um, I wrote a very short blog piece talking about what some black men are frustrated about in regard to the Black Panther. Now, before I get into that, tell me why, or really, why do you think comics could be useful in improving the quality of life for black males, particularly black boys, especially in this era, this moment I'm hearing about, where I'm hearing from white society, I'm hearing from black women, oh, these are just fictional stories. Why should it matter if black women take prominence in these stories? Black boys should just be quiet. You guys are making too much out of this. Why do you think it's important that stories about black heroes, male heroes in particular, why do you think those should be so important for boys in particular, and for other black men who enjoy, supporting the genre? Why is it important?
Well, these stories are very important for Black boys because they give them an example of who they are in the world. It shows them where they are in the world, and a Black boy needs to see an image of manhood that is positive, and he needs to see an example of a man that he can go out here and model after. This is one of the reasons why I started the John Haynes series, was because Mike Williams, the artist who does my covers, he and I, we were talking about how there were not enough images of black men out here for anybody to see, and no really positive images of black masculinity. Now, a lot of black women think, oh, it doesn't matter what images are out here, because a lot of black women, they are sitting there thinking, oh, we don't really need black men out, boys out here, because some of them have daddy issues because their fathers were in their lives. But for a black boy, seeing somebody who looks like them in a comic book, that can basically change their life. I remember being like, I think about 7, 8 years old, and I read one of my brother's old Iron Man books with Jim Rhodes, and that was the first black man I ever saw in a comic book, and had a major impact on my life. Seeing a black man being Iron Man's friend, and then later on seeing him actually put on the armor, it showed me
Mhm.
that there was a place for a black man in in the real world, and a black man could be somebody in the comic book world. And again, for kids, comic books, fantasy, this is a lot to them because this is them opening up their imaginations. And when you minimize a boy's images in media, you minimize him, you make him feel like he is less than. And it's important for him to see, again, positive images of black men in
Right.
comics so that he can see a place for him in the world. He can imagine himself being in the world, and he can imagine himself being something. Because again, if kids imagine themselves as something, they may aspire to do something in the future. So it is very important for a young boy to see a character that looks like himself, a
Yeah.
character carrying and conducting himself in a positive fashion. And when you see a black man being a man, that really starts to build up that boy's confidence, build up that boy's self-esteem, builds up his self-worth, because he sees value in himself,
Right.
because he starts to see these media that says, hey, that you're here, and if you're here, you can go out here and aspire to be something when you get older.
Yeah. And see, and going to Black Panther himself as a character, um, one of the things that I think people miss is, first and foremost, in terms of comics and reading, what some of the recent data has shown, that black boys, by the time you get to eighth grade, only about 10% nationally, 10% of black boys are at reading level, right? So engaging comics, I think, could be helpful on, on a wider front. But when you get to Black Panther in particular, there's a scientific element to T'Challa that I think has been, kind of aimed at inspiring, particularly by black male writers and black male writers and artists in the business. They've tried to use T'Challa to inspire black boys to go into STEM, black boys not only to read comics and read in general, but actually have an appreciation for science. What do you think the values of T'Challa are, and how do you think they're being used or misused by Marvel right now?
Well, T'Challa is supposed to be the king of Wakanda. He's supposed to be an alpha male, and he's supposed to be a brilliant scientist. And from what I've read in the comics in the 80s, he was considered to be a great king, and he was considered to be a great scientist. But what Marvel has done over the last couple of years, especially with the MCU, is that they've minimized T'Challa. They've gone out here, they've really lowered his presence as king, and they've gone out here and they've passed his scientific background over to Shuri. Now, they did this I believe, in the name of so-called diversity, but it has watered down T'Challa as a man and has watered him down as an example of black manhood and black masculinity. And that's
Mhm.
a real serious issue because we really, if your whole Tony Stark could go out here and be a leader and be an
Right,
inventor, then
right.
why can't T'Challa be on that same level for black boys to inspire them to
Mhm.
be number one, aspire to be a head like T'Challa was in the comics? I mean, as I see it, you've got T'Challa as number two and Tony Stark as number one. And that's always been a big problem for me with mainstream media is that they always minimize the black man to make the white man look bigger. And they did the same thing with Arrow in the CW, and they did that with the Mr. Terrific character, who was the world's third smartest man. They
Mm,
made him smaller so that Oliver Queen, a man of average intelligence, could look bigger. And I really have a real issue with that because
right.
black men need to be seen as number one. And this is why I always try to talk about going to buy black fantasy and black comics and black science fiction because it's the only place where we can be number one and black boys can get an image of see where you can be number one and you can see yourself in a world where you are not somebody's background character.
Right. Tell me, seeing this huge transition from the books to film. Now, obviously, this has been going on for decades, but we see it at a fever pitch now where we're finally seeing comics we've read about for decades now on the big screen. And maybe one day some of your projects will do the same. But what are your thoughts about the transition to the big screen, the craze right now over comic book superhero films? And what do you think about the quality of those films and stories?
Well, I in the beginning, the quality was very high because there was a heavy focus on staying true to the source material.
Mm,
However, over the last couple of years, as the MCU has grown, I say that the quality started to decline around Spider-Man: Homecoming. That's when we stopped focusing on building on staying true to the source material, and we started focusing on deviating. This was a mistake that was made in the '80s by the Salkins with the Superman franchise and was
mm,
also made in the '90s with Joel Schumacher with the Batman franchise. This is where creators thought that they knew better than what there was in the comics, and they
right.
started changing the stories up so that it could fit Hollywood's ideas. And as they did this, trying to change the stories up, what happened was there was a major decline in the quality because they started rewriting the stories to fit Hollywood narratives. And that's what alienated a lot of viewers. And that's what's happening right now. I mean, when I look at Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, this looks more like you're trying Hollywood trying to go its own way, and it's not looking like it's trying to stay true to the source material because again, T'Challa was a lot smarter and a lot stronger as a leader than the way they portrayed him in the movies. And what they did basically was erase him from Wakanda Forever, and that's where we started to see the quality really drop as related to these films. I mean, I've seen this kind of fall before, and it
Mm,
all comes from people being a bit too comfortable with their project with the characters and not understanding that you are trying to create a product to serve the customer. And in this case, they've basically ignored all of the black male customers who spent billions of dollars to make Black Panther one of the top movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying to, and even written blog pieces about this. The last few years, I was saying there has been a rich legacy of black men in comics who grew from little boys who read to grown men who went into the industry to help kind of steer some of these stories and properties in a direction that makes it more applicable to black boys in that battle. Seeing black men as strong and heroic and not just as sidekicks has been a multi-generational battle in comics. To see that just kind of haphazardly given to other demographics that didn't necessarily fight that battle is something that bothered me. It's one of the things that bothered me. And the analogy I tried to create in a short piece that I did, I shared it with you, but I'll share it with those who are watching right now. Um, to try and give people a sense of scale with this. So these are some pictures of Ken dolls, and black, or I guess they have this, I named Steven, but these are the black Ken dolls, so to speak. And one of the things I said in a piece, and I shared it in the chat for those of you who might be interested in reading it, is that what we have happening here is akin to Barbie, the company realizing that they have been discriminating against black girls for generations. So they decide to deal with that by creating a whole line of Kens. black Kens, all kinds of shapes and sizes, and they create one black Barbie doll, and then they get rid of her after 4 years when the person that they designed her off of dies. That's what's going on with the Panther in particular. Now we can talk about a lot of different projects, other projects with black men in the MCU and outside of the MCU, many of which come out of a legacy of being sidekicks. The importance of the Panther was that, as Shawn said, he was the king of his own nation, the most technologically advanced nation in the world. He's one of the top 10 intellects in the world, and in that, we got to read for generations about this character. And the very first time we get to see him on screen, his greatest superpower is given to his little sister, which is like having a Superman movie where Lois has all the strength and the flight. Who wants? Why would you even want to watch that? Right? That's not even the character. But when we get to T'Challa, somehow it's okay that his greatest superpower is given to someone else. And then we get to the second movie, and we're told he's not even going to be alive in it. They've decided to kill off the character out of so-called respect for the actor, who I have a great deal of respect for. But I think he could be tastefully sent off the way Paul Walker was in the Fast and Furious franchise without having to kill off the character himself. So the analogy I made in this particular short piece, it's a very short piece, was basically that it's akin to Barbie. Instead, in their effort to somehow apologize to black girls, they create a bunch of Ken dolls. And black men are dancing in the streets, celebrating it, telling black women to shut up. That's what I'm noticing happening right now. The legacy of black men in comics is being dismissed and pushed to the side to cater to demographics that don't have the same kind of historical fight in making sure that there's certain demographics present in the narrative. And somehow they're reaping the benefits of this shift, but not acknowledging how this impacts black men. What are your thoughts about longtime black male comic readers and artists and writers and creators who are now watching the multi-generational fruits of their war in the comic industry to be represented, being just kind of arbitrarily gifted to others who don't have that same kind of history?
I'm deeply disappointed about it. I'm actually disgusted by it because many black men, like the late Dwayne McDuffie, they fought for years for to put a balanced images of black men out there. They fought to
Yes.
represent black men out here, and Marvel Studios basically slapped all of those black men in the face, and it slapped all of those black men who went out here and bought tickets to this movie, hoping to see another black comic or black fantasy turned into a franchise. And instead of trying to go and support those black men who've been spending money for over 60 years, they go out here and try to pander to black women. And that's a real insult because you're saying that the black man doesn't matter in a business where it's mostly black men and boys who have been buying these books for years, been going to see these movies for years. And even in my case, we've been buying the action figures for years of characters like I even made my own custom Jim Rhodes Iron Man.
Nice.
But we've been buying these characters for years, and they're acting like our money doesn't matter and that we don't matter. They're just going to go for these black females who have never really bought these characters. I mean, I have been in this business for publishing for over 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
and women don't buy superhero anything at all. And if they do go sometimes, it's because there's a strong masculine black man there. That's the main reason why they would be interested in it. And from what I know, they're trying to push this girl power. And I know for writing and actually publishing and selling books, you're not going to sell a lot of books trying to push girl power to women because women get jealous of other women. Women don't like other women, and they don't like seeing women with power. That's something women don't want to see, but your Marvel Studios wants to try to go for that group, thinking that they're going to go out here and think they're going to make some money off it, but there's no money to be made. And I really believe that in some ways they're trying to sabotage the growing black fantasy market, black science fiction market, and black comic book market because they don't want you to see black people in these kind of stories, and especially they don't want to see black men in these kind of stories. So they're trying to do everything in their power to sabotage that market before it starts to get momentum. However, that market is still growing because we have a lot of black creators like myself out here and many others like Concrete Comics and other independent publishers. They're out here putting in work on comics every day. And as they put in work on comics every day, we're seeing that market grow because people want product for their sons, and they want to see black men in comics expressing black masculinity. And if they can't get it from Marvel Studios, they're going to go someplace to go get their stories featuring black men acting masculine.
Mm. Now, two-part question. What finally pushed you over the edge, as it were, to finally say, you know what, I just need to make my own projects? Like, was there any one thing that made you just kind of like say, this is it's time to do it? And then secondly, tell us about some of the various characters you've created over the years that people should know about.
Well, what pushed me over the edge was back when I was 17 years old. I saw the NWA coming into popularity. And when I saw the NWA coming into popularity, I saw what I was going to be the return to the old stereotypes that were dogging Black people in American media. And when I was 17 years old, I said I wanted to create positive stories about the Black experience. And as I grew older, I wanted to build on the legacy of Bill Cosby, who ushered in a golden age for Black people by presenting us some of the most balanced and humanized images, and actually ushered in a golden age for Black images in Black media. So I wanted to build on that momentum. And I worked for a good 20 plus years developing characters as I was learning how to write stories. And I worked very hard to develop some of what I think are stories that show you a rich picture of Black culture and show you a rich picture of the Black experience. Now, my first published character, Isis, I created that character back in 1999. And I created that character to show that the Egyptian gods came from Black people. And I also wanted to create a character that would contemporize the Egyptian mythology and Egyptian lore. And
Mhm.
over the last couple of years, I've turned the character into what I call the goddess next door, so that little Black girls could have a girl next door who could be a heroine, and show them how a Black woman can go out here and help others. And I've written over 20 books in the Isis series. Now, after I created Isis, I came out here with the John Haynes character, and I had been working on the John Haynes character off and on since 1990, but I finally got the best version, I say, of the character in 2005 when I wrote The Temptation of John Haynes. And the John Haynes character, I wrote him to be a positive example of Black men and Black manhood. I wanted to show that a Black man could go out here and be a CEO and a corporate boss, all while working in a corporate hell filled with demons. And I wanted to create a character that would show you that all the examples of Black manhood, Black masculinity, we don't get to see how a Black man works in professional business settings.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to do this in a kind of a supernatural fantasy type story, because John Haynes works in a corporate hell that is actually filled with demons, and he takes on supernatural threats in between corporate business deals. And when I wrote this book, I wanted to again put some really fun aspects of the struggles of men versus the devil and things like that. So that was the second character I created back in 2005. And I've went on to create some other characters. I created a character named Matilda Crowley, who was an African American goth. And I really like the goth subculture and the
Mhm.
goth scene. It really reminds me a lot of the old school pre-civil rights Black community. And it shows me a community. And when I did this story, I explored a lot about the goth subculture and the whole aspects with the Black community. And it was a fun series to write, the Spinsterella trilogy. And I show you the world of a Black teenager's journey into the goth subculture. That's a
Okay.
character I really like writing. And then there's the Eastine character, who was John Haynes' assistant. She was a character I wrote one story on a fluke with her, and it turned into a series, and it was one of my more popular books. But those are the four big books. I mean, I've written other ones like Eternal Night, which is a vampire novel,
Mhm.
and that came out of an ISIS book I called Night of the Vampires. And I decided to write the origin story of Lilith Graves, who was in Eternal Night. And later on, after that, I did the John Haynes series, and right now I'm doing the first John Haynes comic book, John Haynes at Death's Door, which is the fifth book in the John Haynes series. So I've been working really hard on different books and different projects, and I'm slowly trying to transition into comics. but I'm still going to be doing novels. I really enjoy doing novels and showing you all of these different aspects of the Black community and the Black experience, showing you that there's a bigger picture of the Black community and
Right.
in the fantasy and the action stories. And then so you can explore and see that there's a much bigger world to the Black community than the hood that the mainstream media wants you to see.
Hmm. What how could I? What would you say inspired? Because John Haynes is is one of the major characters that your Kickstarter is dealing with right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What? How would you describe the character to those who've never heard of it? And maybe is it tied to anything that inspired you to write that particular character, to create that character?
Well, the John Haynes character is tied to my relationship with God. It was inspired because my mother once said that the devil didn't like me. So I decided to throw a middle finger up at the devil
Okay.
by creating a story where his main arch enemy was this character, John Haynes, who is a guy he doesn't like and he wants to destroy. And he tried to compromise him by making him a CEO of the corporation, and tried to have his assistants seduce him, but it blew up in his face. So the whole thing is that the John Haynes character is a guy that the devil doesn't like, and he really hates him so much he wants to try to do anything in his power to destroy him. And that's one of the core foundations of the John Haynes series. And the John Haynes series is a story about a black man who the devil doesn't like, but is out here living his life and being an example of Christ to everyone, and it's being a positive example to everyone. And as he's dealing with these different supernatural threats, he's out here trying to do good and help out the Black community. Now, other inspirations after my mother come from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Ghostbusters. I always liked the comedy in Ghostbusters, and I always liked the action of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I mixed that all together along with Disney's Gargoyles to make the John Haynes character story model and the John Haynes character story arc. I mean, the John Haynes character again, his whole thing is that he's on the devil's public enemy number one, and the devil's always out to destroy him, but he's always fighting to overcome.
Beautiful. Beautiful. One of the things I noticed, especially in this last couple weeks, um, one of the complaints that I've heard a lot of, especially from Black feminists in particular, is, oh, you guys who are upset about the Panther, you just hate women. You just hate seeing powerful women. You don't want to see women succeed. All these kinds of, narratives that people are comfortable just running off. But in what you just described, in the number of books you've written, you've done a lot of characters and books around female figures. Do you get complaints about feminism or sexism when you're making statements about Panther or the comic industry? And how do people read? I mean, how do people make sense of the fact that you've created all these characters and books around Black women, even though people have these critiques about gender and sexism and so on and so forth? Do you get that kind of issue? Do people come at you with that at all?
They've been at me like that from minute one. I remember when I started the ISIS series, all the feminists came out here. They really hated the character, and the
Wow.
character was a black woman. This was a black woman who was a goddess. She was a descendant of the Egyptian gods. And these feminists, because they didn't like the character, they would go out here and they would put the character on lousy book cover lists. Because back then I was hand drawing the covers,
Mm,
and then I saw those comments, I decided, okay, I'm going to sell some of my collectibles on eBay, and to get the money to pay an artist to do a cover. And then they shifted from the narratives about the bad covers to light skin and dark skin. I've been
mhm,
getting a lot of heat from these feminists for years on ISIS, and I get a lot of heat from them on other heroines that I've done, like Matilda Crowley, and other characters I've done, like Marilyn Marie. For a screenplay I did all about Marilyn. When it comes down to the feminists, they don't like the fact that a black man is out here talking about the image of black women. And the whole thing is they don't have any alternatives to presenting an image of black women out here. When we look at what they talk about as related to representation, their images are over exaggerated. Their images of women, they're not very balanced. I mean, when I go out here and I create heroines, I come from experience of having two sisters and a cousin and a mother. So I know from my experiences with women that that women have certain character traits. I
Right,
mean, I live around women. I
right.
know about women, and I even one book I wrote called The Thetas. I had women in the review section saying they were surprised that a man could write women so well. That's how they were shocked that a man could write women so well. But I can draw from experience from my social interactions with women in my family and women at work that
Right.
I knew how women behaved and I knew how they went around. So the feminists, they just don't they want to go out here and push propaganda like they did with Ms. Marvel and She-Hulk. They don't want to give us a balanced picture of women. They don't want to show us a healthy picture of women. But when I go out here and write women and I present that to certain women out here, they're floored at how great the presentation of the women are. And I've had men who have gone out here, given my ISIS series books to their daughters, and their
Mhm.
daughters are just eager for more of those books.
Right.
And they just love the fact the way I present women in the books. They love the way I present women in the stories. There's nothing negative that I put in my stories about women. I mean, they're sitting there saying, "Oh, there's all these this that there's need for all this empowerment." I present strong women in my books. I mean, most of my the strength I present is internal because I know from my experiences with women, they have internal strength, and the great strength that they have is strength of character. And that's what men and women want to see with a heroine. They want to see the strength of character. They want to see a woman having that internal strength. But what every of the feminists want to do is show you a woman being like a man, and
Mhm,
being like a man is a
mhm,
turnoff for most women. I
mhm.
know this for years from selling books that what makes the characters popular is that having that internal strength, having a certain lifestyle where you can escape. I mean, these are things that are attractive to women about female heroines. But when
Mhm.
you have the feminists, they want you to see a woman being a man, but women don't want to see a woman being like a man, and they don't want to see a woman out here being really obnoxious because that's a turnoff to them.
Okay. I noticed one of the things you said, you didn't say that you based your character on some ex-girlfriend that broke your heart or someone that didn't want to give you a number. You based it on women you grew up around, women you knew, women you've been around. That's different than what I think a lot of these feminists would espouse publicly. That black men have the capacity to create characters based off of our interaction with folks that we've been around our entire lives. Why do you think black men don't get the benefit of the doubt in terms of what we create or even how we critique when it comes to these gender dynamics?
Well, when it comes down to the mainstream media, they love to push narratives as related to black men and black male creativity. They don't really want to think that a black man can have the inspiration from people around him. They want to think that we really don't know how to think at all. So what they want to do is say, "Oh, you don't know how to think. You don't really know how to imagine." Again, it's a way of minimizing our intelligence. It's a way of devaluing us as people, and we have that ability. I mean, when I go out here and I create heroines, again, part of the process is I come from the experiences I've had with different women. And sometimes I'll get inspiration for characters look like the Eastern characters inspired by Sally Richardson Whitfield partially. So her look looks like Sally Richardson. But
Mhm.
many of my experiences come from many of the characters' parts come from the women I've known in my life. And again, men write what they know. And if you know a lot of great women, you're going to have a lot of great stories about women.
Mhm. Okay. Um, One of the things I've noticed that's become real popular in the last 10 to 15 years is this whole idea of the Mary Sue. And I'm thinking about it in a number of contexts, but I think the most recent I ran across was this latest She-Hulk trailer, where you see her stronger than Bruce. She's more capable. She becomes a Hulk more easily. Everything kind of comes to her. Have you seen this trope, and what is your response to that, not only as a consumer but also as a writer in the comic book industry? What is your response to this whole idea of women where it just comes easy, they get it all, everything is there already, there's really no hero's journey in that respect? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my thoughts are that a Mary Sue is a really weak character. It's just a personal insert. And a personal insert isn't really a character, and you can't really build a story around a personal insert character. It's basically the person making themselves an avatar
Mm,
to represent themselves in
mm,
the series, and that's not who the She-Hulk really is. When I looked at that She-Hulk trailer, I was absolutely disgusted by it because all we're getting is somebody's fantasy about inserting themselves in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not who the character is. Now, I have read the character in the She-Hulk. I have She-Hulk #1 in my collection. It's a beat up copy, but I have it.
yep,
And She-Hulk is a character who is started out as a lawyer who wanted to fight some mobsters and do right. And then later on, she started to after she defeated the mobsters and had her series. She then went on to see the real power of of being herself, and she started to gain self-confidence by becoming the She-Hulk. So all of that was lost because they wanted to create an avatar character, and avatar characters basically they have no depth, they have no dimension because they really don't have any conflicts to overcome, they have
yeah,
no obstacles to overcome, they
yeah,
have no real conflict, and they when you don't have conflict you don't have a story. That's one of the things I know as a writer. When I go out here and create heroines, a heroine has to have something that they have to overcome, they have to have some issue that they have to deal with, and these internal stories are going to what drive the heroine to be able to o- take the hero's journey. Because
yeah,
when I was writing the book Spellbound, which featured the Matilda Crowley character, I had the character, she was trying to overcome being shy and she had to overcome her anxieties about being bullied. And that was a key part of the character's transformation arc as she entered the goth subculture
mm,
and became this Black Widow character that she wanted to become. And in other characters, like the Eastine character, I have it where she has given her life to Christ and she's trying to overcome all of these internal demons she's had about her past, and she's also trying to overcome demons in the real world. That's her character journey, and that's what makes that character fascinating. And then with the Isis character, she was out here. She fought the good fight during the civil rights period. No, before the civil rights period, she was fighting during Jim Crow, and she's back in the world in the 21st century. And while she was a teacher during the pre-civil rights period, she has to be the student and learn about the world in the 21st century. So what's happening with today with these characters today, like the She-Hulk, is that they don't want the character to go through the hero's journey because they don't want the character to hurt. They don't want the character to lose. But in order for a heroine to grow, she
right,
has to hurt, she has to lose, she has to fail. And that's how we see the character grow. And that's what the Mary Sues don't do. They don't go through that process. They don't go through that pain. And that's what makes them characters that you can't connect with and relate to because they don't go through anything. And because
right.
they don't go through anything, we can't learn as they're learning about life.
Well, and it's getting even further, man. From my understanding, and this is rumor, but I think it's rumor based on a pretty good account of things. One of the things that's going to happen with She-Hulk is she's not even going to have the traditional origin she had. In essence, in the old comics, Bruce gave her a blood transfusion because she, needed help. Right. In this
Yeah.
particular instance, my understanding of it is she's actually going to help Bruce after a car accident and accidentally get blood. So even this notion of her male cousin helping her is being removed and rewritten, so to speak. So there's no narrative for men being instrumental in women's lives because women don't need men. And it's one of these kind of underlying currents that I'm noticing that's going to even kind of retroactively be applied to these stories' origins. But last question, what do you see right now as the potential for Black comics? I mean, we've heard recently of the 3 million at plus, more than likely at this point. I haven't been following it. That the Ripperverse has gotten you. We've seen Black Sands. We've seen a number of different. What do you think the potential is right now for Black comic creations? And what advice would you give to anybody that's interested in going that direction?
Well, I see the Black comic, science fiction, and fantasy market growing exponentially. I mean, I see it being very big because we're seeing with the Ripperverse and we're seeing with Black Sands, we're seeing that there is a potential for, between a multi-billion-dollar marketplace. I
Mm,
mean, there are Black people out here who are eager to go out here and see stories with people who look like them in fantasy and science fiction stories. There's a large market out here, and Black Panther proved that that market is solid. I
yeah,
mean, making over $1 billion at the box office, selling out every Marvel Legends toy. It's There's a proven market there, and that market is growing every day. I remember I was going to shows back before the pandemic, and places like the Schomburg were jam packed with kids. I mean, kids today are blessed, as I see it, because when I was a kid, we didn't have all of books and stories directly with stories with us in it, and we didn't have a whole bunch of series. I mean, we had Jim Rhodes, we had Cyborg, we had Power Man, but kids today, you have so many different options. I mean, you have so many creators out here putting together projects like myself and many others. So there's an entire world that's opening up to young kids out here with Black heroes in comics, science fiction, and fantasy. And for the advice I would give anybody who's going out here and wants to do their own comic or their own fantasy novel, you have to really go slow, and you have to make sure your story is solid. Everything with your story has to be on point, and your story has to be very tight and concise, because your story is going to be the foundation for everything.
yeah.
And if you're doing a comic, your story has to be solid, so that your artist has something to work with. And you have to make sure if you're doing a comic, you get the right artist. Now, when I wanted to go out here, I was looking for an artist, and thank God I found one on Facebook. Antonio Balderi. He's done a fantastic job on John Haynes at Death's Door. The art is looking like anime. That's what he said he was going for.
Mm,
And it looks absolutely fantastic. Everybody tells me it looks fantastic. And you want to get a very good artist who is clear with your story and is connected to your story, because then they'll be enthusiastic about doing the job. So you want to make sure you get a quality story as your foundation, get a quality artist, and don't be afraid to spend a little money. I mean, because this is going to cost some money, but don't be afraid to spend the money, because if you spend the money to put together a quality product, you'll leave a strong first impression on your readers.
mm, okay. Okay. Um, Tell people how they can support the Kickstarter. Tell them what exactly it entails, what comes in it, to let people know what they can do.
Well, the John Haynes at Death's Door Kickstarter is currently on Kickstarter, and it has 4 days left on it. And if you want to pick up a copy of John Haynes at Death's Door, you may do so by going over to the Kickstarter. I'll put a link in the private chat so you can share it with the viewers.
Please do.
And all you have to do is put in a pledge. You can get a paper copy or a digital copy. The paper copies are $5, and the digital copies are $15 with a little shipping charge. But it's going to be well worth it, because this is the first John Haynes comic, and it features a positive image of a Black man and a positive image of Black masculinity. And all of my SJS Direct books, most of them, are family friendly. Again, I've had fathers buy these for their kids, and this comic is family friendly and is basically everything that if you got read a 1980s comic, you would have no problem giving that to your kids, and you would have no problem sharing this comic with your kids as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I really appreciate you taking the time to come up, especially on relative short notice. You're on East Coast time. I'm on West Coast, so I appreciate you moving some things around and being willing to join us. Any last thoughts or anything you want to leave people with, in terms of what you're doing? Please share that with us.
Well, currently I'm working on some more John Haynes projects that are going to be coming out in 2023. And those include John Haynes Justified, where he takes on Thor, the Thunder God,
Mhm.
and John Haynes 1987, which is going to be a flashback story to John Haynes when he was 13 years old in 1987, and the start of his journey and his relationship with God. So those are two upcoming projects. And I also have two SJS Direct 2021 books, which are ISIS Legacy where we see the impact of a woman on a man's legacy. And I also have Esteem Horror of the Hyena Woman, a story based on the African lore of the Hyena Woman. Both of those books are available in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com. And you can get your copy by going over to Amazon.com and typing in Shawn James Isis series or Shawn James Esteem, and both of those books will pop up there.
Okay. Hey, man, thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
coming. And yeah, y'all support Shawn James, support his Kickstarter, buy the books, check it out, share it. Yeah. So thanks a lot, man.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Here's the thing. I'm very interested in supporting Black comics. I'm interested in supporting creators, so on and so forth. So I want you to use the comment section, especially for this video. If you have a project that you're putting out there, to go ahead and share it in the comment section, get a discussion going around Black male, content, especially as it relates to comic fiction, so on and so forth. I want to be able to use the platform to help brothers out, to get some of their stuff up for people to know about. So please take advantage of the time to do that, so we can get the word out. Because in as much as I'm frustrated with the things that I see, these major corporations doing with the Black male image, I want to support those who are already in the trenches doing that work that we say we want to support. So let's go ahead and actually do that. Other than that, appreciate y'all coming, appreciate the support, and I'm looking forward to the comments to read more about what we may not have covered tonight, what else needs to be a part of this discussion, and so on and so forth. So appreciate y'all. Y'all have a good night, and I will see you soon. Peace.